Well, today we are concluding our 9 Lives series. Oh, yeah. Cue audience participation. I loved it. This has been a fun series. I don't know about you, but I learned a lot about myself. I've been learning more about others around me, too. It's been really helpful, and that's why we went through this series. I've heard from a few of you the same thing. It's like, man, now I understand my dad a little bit more. Now I understand myself a little bit more, why I do these things that I do, maybe. This is a series that's all about who we are and what makes us tick and what God might have to say about that. Because here's the other thing. So often we see these negative things that we do, and instead of allowing God to redeem those, we just think that's a bad thing in me, and it's always going to be bad, and it's never going to be redeemed, and there's nothing good ever going to come from it. But what we've done is we've said, well, this is just kind of how I'm wired, and maybe there's a better way to look at this. Maybe there's a different way to look at this. And one of the tools we've used in order to help us understand this is called the Enneagram. That's what we've been using throughout this entire series. Now, if this is your first time to see it, even though we've been in this series for a little bit, this is your first time to see it, don't let this freak you out, this gram here. This is not a pentagram, it's an Enneagram. And Ennea just means 9, and gram means figure or drawing, so there's 9 points here. And what we do is we look at these 9 basic personality types that we see that exist kind of across civilizations, across human culture, things of that nature, and how they kind of affect us, and there are boxes that we end up putting ourselves in a lot of times. And the reason that's important, the reason that's so important is because when Jesus was asked, hey, what's the greatest commandment? What is all of this about? What do I really got to know if I want to do this right? Jesus says, well, you got to love God. You got to love your neighbor as you love yourself. So when Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? It's loving God, but also loving your neighbor and loving yourself. And what we're hoping is that by understanding a little bit more about ourselves and these basic personalities, that we're going to be able to love ourselves and others better and more fully, which will lead us to an even better life and make this world an even better place. It just might help bring heaven to earth a little bit more, at least where we touch things. So we've gone all the way around. We started with 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and today we're going to be looking at the type 7s on the Enneagram. In short, type 7s are really great people. These are people that you love to have around. I like to call them the thermostats. Right? The thermostats. These are people that when they come in and they're super excited, guess what everybody else is? Super excited. And when they're not very excited about something, they don't even have to be down. They just have to be not as excited about the thing you're about to do. They kind of suck all the energy out of the room. They don't even do it on purpose. But they're the thermostats of that room, of that friend group a lot of times. People will unknowingly rely on these people to bring the enthusiasm to stuff. So if you plan a party and all of your friends are going to come and everybody's excited, but your type 7 friend decides they're not going to show, it's generally not as fun of a party. That's the type of people we're talking about. Now, let me give you some basic stuff with them, and then we'll get down into the specifics. The first thing is their basic desire is to be satisfied and content. Now, you might say, Josh, I too would like to be satisfied and content in my life, and I as well. But what we're talking about when it comes to their basic desire is this motivates them. This is their actual motivation. You and I, we want to be satisfied and content, but we know how to live in the painful parts of life and the darkness of life a little bit more maybe if you're not a 7. But if you're a type 7, this motivates you. You want to feel satisfied and content. And the things you do and don't do revolve around this. So if there's any pain at all involved in it, you're leaving. You're out. Because their basic fear is of feeling any pain. I don't want to feel pain. None of us do. But some of us, we handle it a little bit better than others. And we're able to live into that and lean into it in those dark parts of life. But when it comes to these 7s, these are the ones who, when they're watching Schindler's List with their family or something, I don't know why you would do that, but if you're watching Schindler's List with some friends or something like that, they're the ones that it gets to a real serious part. It's painful, it's uncomfortable. If you've ever seen it, you know it's a tearjerker. These are the people who crack a joke in that time. They make a weird joke because they don't know how to handle it. Or maybe you're getting a serious moment in life. Maybe it's in a eulogy at a funeral or something like that, and they just go making a bad joke. I tend to fall into that category myself sometimes. These are the ones who avoid pain at all costs, especially the more immature and the more unhealthy they are. They avoid pain at all costs. So they'll go from one thing to the next. One thing to the next, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, you name it. They're trying to avoid pain at all costs. They try to keep everything around them lively and positive. And so if it's not going to be lively and positive, moving on. Not going to be lively and positive, I'm out. Because their source of joy is never found within themselves or even in the present moment. Their source of joy is in the next thing or the next event or the next person. That's where their source of joy comes. And they wait, and they love that time where they get to wait on that next great thing or person or event. They love it, which is why their deadly sin, the thing that kind of bites them if they're not looking, is gluttony. Now, we're not talking just about food, although food could be included. Not talking about just food. We're talking about a whole host of things, because remember, these are people who are moving on. The second something gets boring, the second something brings any type of pain, they're moving on to the next great thing. They see a shiny object, they're there. I have a friend who's a 7, I believe. He's never done any of the testing or read any of the books, but I believe he's a 7 myself. This is what he does. He's the type of person that will have 14 W-2s at the end of the year. Right? He's that guy. He's that guy. He's the guy that goes from one job to the next because he gets bored at this one, or he thinks, oh, I'll make a little bit more money here, and then I can go do this, and then I'll go to that. Right? He's really great. And let me tell you something. He's an incredible salesman. The man could sell ice to an Eskimo. He's incredible. And he can come up with all these reasons for you and for him and for his family about why this is actually a great thing for him to be on his 11th job of the year. And he'll convince you. But it's because he sees that next thing. See, for 7s, more is never enough. And that can apply to food. Well, there's some chocolate cake. But it can also apply to other things that are addicting. See, 7s are a little bit more prone to addiction. That's not to say that all 7s have addictive personalities or are addicts or in some way, but it is to say that their personality type is just a little bit more prone to addiction. And so they've got to watch themselves with things like alcohol. Because how many friends have you known that maybe you already think I'm talking about them? Let me ask this question. How many of them struggle with things like alcohol or using their money in terrible ways? Going on vacations they can't afford. How many of these people do you know that they go to a party and just because they like the way they feel at 2 glasses of wine, they're going to get 2 more? Because if it's a great feeling, why let the party stop? They struggle, and they're vulnerable with this stuff. They can also struggle with commitment. They're fun people to be around, but they can struggle with commitment. So if you're inviting them to come have dinner with you, a lot of times a 7 may say, let me get back to you. Well, we're having dinner on Friday night. It's Friday morning. Yeah, I know. Let me get back to you. Because they're waiting to see if something better comes along. No offense, right? They're waiting to see if something better might just be coming along. And maybe if they show up and there's something really cool going on outside and they're always looking at that, they may just say, hey, I got to go and do this thing. They always have an exit strategy to go to the next really cool, fun thing. That's a type 7. This can be tough on marriages and romantic relationships. A type 7 person might be moving on a little bit faster than anybody else. Type 7 person might have trouble staying in a marriage because they're getting bored, or maybe, as anybody who's ever been married knows, you get married after like day 2, it's not all a bed of roses, is it? You say, oh, I don't know, did I do the right thing? But 7s are great, man. They're great people, and they're great people. You want them in your life and on your team. These are people who embody joy and a zest for life. They go after the fun things of life, the exciting things in life, like Black Friday shoppers go after a TV at Walmart. You know what I mean? They're like that. These are the proverbial kids in the candy store. Life is candy. And I'm a kid, and I'm there. Can you imagine what it would have been like for you at age 7 to be able to just go get whatever you wanted in the local candy store? Didn't matter how many cavities you got later, you got to eat what you wanted. That's them. They're going from one thing to the next. They're trying to get it all. They're dreamers. They're initiators. That's what makes them so good at work, by the way. These are people who will often start businesses from the ground up. They're entrepreneurs. A lot of them are serial entrepreneurs. They can't help but start new things. They love starting new stuff. And so they'll build something up from the ground, make it successful, and then they get bored and they do something, and they sell it and do something else. These are the type of people we're talking about. Now, they're great team players at work. If you have a 7 who you work with, or maybe who's a boss or somebody under you, they're great team players, but you got to give them a long leash. You got to give them some room to run and be a thoroughbred racehorse type person, okay? You can't be a micromanager with these people because they don't like being controlled. But they'll do excellent, great work if you leave them some room to run. Sometimes people will rely on them to bring all of that energy and all of that enthusiasm to everything, and they'll play into that. And so as kids and teenagers, they'll start being class clowns a lot, and that follows them into the workplace a little bit too. And if they don't do their work enough, if they don't do enough of their work, and if they're not really serious about their work, like everybody else thinks they should be, they develop a reputation for being an unserious person, for being somebody who's just kind of here filling a role, who's not really doing much, even though they may feel like they're doing a lot. As kids, these type 7 people receive the message that you're on your own and no one is coming to help. And different people and these different personalities develop different self-defense mechanisms to deal with a message like that. When 7s hear the word, you're on your own, no one is coming to help, their response was, okay, I'm going to create my own kind of utopia where nothing painful or bad ever happens. I'm going to do that. And the way they create that utopia is to run away from it, run away from that pain, run away from that stuff. I got to take care of me, and I want to feel content and satisfied. So the only way I can take care of me is to get away from that painful stuff. See, they live for the next adventure. They live for the next big thing to happen. They're very good at talking themselves out of trouble, though. They're very good at debate, but they're really, really great at talking themselves out of trouble and talking other people into things. So when they're unhealthy, 7s become pessimistic, they become judgmental, often argumentative. They can't stay very long. They're non-committal. And sometimes they can have an addictive personality. They'll blame others, and then they'll also lapse into this black and white thinking, never seeing the gray that's there in the world somewhere. But when they're at their best, they are really fun to be around. And when they're at their best, they make all the things you do with them even more fun. But they're also more serious. They can explore deeper sides of all the arguments and the different sides of things, and they're able to feel these painful emotions that before they would have run away from. They're able to dip their toes down into that nastiness of life. Let me give you an example of a 7 that I see. Just kidding, we're not going to do that. He's not in the Bible. The one we'll do today is David. King David. He's an ancient Israelite king named David. Now, maybe you know the general story of David a little bit. You know that he was maybe a nobody from nowhere, this guy David. David comes on the scene, makes his name in one of the most famous stories of the Bible. And even if you've never read the Bible, you haven't ever spent time going through all of that, you probably know the story I'm going to talk about today. You probably know the story I'm going to talk about today. Even if you've never stepped foot in a church, maybe you're watching online, it's the first time you ever had a chance to even take in a Christian worship service, all right? You know this story. The story of David and Goliath. See, I told you knew it. 10 points and a gold star for you. Yeah, David and Goliath, man. David, the way it kind of shapes up is David is helping out at the palace. He's a music man for old King Saul. He's You'd think Saul would know him at this point, but he doesn't really know him too much. But David is also needed at home, where he's a shepherd and doing shepherdly things, because that's what his family does. It's a long line of shepherds. Well, Israel, the kingdom of Israel, goes to war with this people nearby known as the Philistines. And so they go to war, and one day they're standing out and they're about to go to battle, and they're all lined up across each other. Imagine a big plain in front of them. On one side was the Israelites, on the other side was the Philistines. And every day there was this Philistine that would come out, big, huge, humongous person named Goliath. And Goliath was a giant. Now, because you and I don't see giants all the time, let's just imagine it's like an NBA player or something like that, okay? And maybe let's just say, for the sake of argument, can you imagine Shaquille O'Neal in his prime, ready to do battle? And then there's you looking at him across the way? And what if Shaquille O'Neal would come out and he had a gigantic spear and a gigantic shield, and he goes, all right, which one of y'all wants to fight me? Who's raising their hand? Not this guy. Not ever. He says, look, let's do it this way. We can save lives. Here's what we'll do. You get your best guy, and I'll fight them. Whichever one of us wins, that's their whole army wins. And then everybody else, you become the slaves. And I'm really talking about you, Israel, because I'm going to win. Well, of course, nobody on Israel's side was built like Shaq. Nobody was out there. I mean, this guy, Goliath, he'd been coming out. He hadn't lost a fight since he was like 2, okay? And his nanny was always mad about it. And then there's everybody else, normal-sized people. Even the biggest among them was King Saul, right? Head and shoulders taller than everybody else. He's not wandering out there. And so they just sat at an impasse. And every day, day after day after day, Goliath would come out and he'd go, hey, one of y'all fight me. Let's get it on. Let's do this. And that way we can end all of this. Who wants to fight me? You guys are cowards. Let's go. And he's just mocking them, and he's cursing the God of Israel, doing all of this stuff. And people are putting up with it because they don't know what else to do. They don't want to start fighting. They don't care if they're cowards. They just don't want to start fighting with this guy. And that's where we run into David. Now, as I mentioned before, David had been in Saul's court. David had been around. He had done a lot of stuff for Saul. We've seen David. If you're reading through Scripture at this point, you've already seen David. But he was such a nobody from nowhere that Saul didn't even remember him. But here's what we learn about David right here. Now, David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time, he was very old. Okay? That's what we know from the outside, that David is one of 8 sons. I don't know if you come from a family full of boys. Maybe you got 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever. But if you had 8 sons, imagine all the fights David had been in his life. Imagine all the rough and tumble stuff he had done in his life. Now, Jesse is old. What I really want you to understand, though, is here, Judah. He's from the tribe of Judah. And early on in Judah's history, there was a promise made to the progenitor of that tribe, Judah, that they would rule and be in charge. Well, here's what we see next about old David. David was the youngest. He's the youngest of 8. Imagine being the youngest boy of 8. How much you got picked on, right? But also remember, this is a patriarchal society that being the oldest son was the most important thing. You got the most inheritance. You were the next in line to be kind of the leader of your family. It was a big deal. But if you're the 8th and youngest son, you're a nobody. You're a nobody. You're an afterthought. You're somebody nobody really cares about. You're just kind of an annoying kid always hanging around. Like your older brothers are out there running stuff, and then you're there picking your nose. Okay? That's what we're talking about with somebody like David at this point in history. So the 3 oldest followed Saul. That means off to war. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So David isn't even big enough to go out and fight with everybody else. His older brothers go off with Saul to go fight the Philistines. They're the ones fighting, which means that David also was going to have to be picking up extra chores, going to be picking up extra shifts as the shepherd, probably out there by himself when he used to have another person with him. This is a tough time for everybody. And on top of that, his dad is sending him back and forth with supplies to the front because in those days, armies didn't always supply food and weapons and other materials you might need. So his dad keeps sending him with food like bread and cheese up to his brothers to see how they're doing, to check on them. Well, one day, when David is going to check on them, he arrives and he gives all of his stuff to who he has to give it to. He's checking on his brothers. And as he's walking up to his brothers, he hears Goliath. Hey, which one of y'all wants to come out here and fight me, you cowards? And cursing the God of Israel, cursing the Israelites. And David's taken aback. He's like, I thought we served the most powerful God there was. I thought we had this under control. We've been fighting these Philistines for years, and God always gives us the victory. We took this land because God gave it to us. Like, what's going on? Why isn't anybody fighting him? They looked back at him and they said, have you seen the guy? He's huge. David says, like that matters. Well, David starts asking questions. He says, why isn't anybody fighting him? They say, well, he's so big. He says, yeah, but what if somebody does fight him? What if somebody does actually go out there and fight him and wins? Well, the guys in the army say, well, that's not going to happen, especially with you short stuff. But what'll happen is King Saul will give this man a lot of money, give him his daughter in marriage, and that family will be exempt from taxes from here on out. Seems pretty good to me. Seemed pretty good to David too. And David says, I'll fight him. Let's do this. I got this. Now, if David is a 7, that's exactly what you would expect a 7 to say, because it's the next big thing. So his brothers come over and they hear all of this and they say, what are you talking about? You're going to fight him. Be quiet. Like, I just gave you a noogie last week. Quit doing that. Like, you're just here to make a mess. You think you know stuff. You don't know what you're doing. Just be quiet. He goes, no, I'll fight him. I'll do this. I'm tough. Well, next thing you know, he's in front of King Saul. And King Saul says, well, let me give you some armor. Let me give you something. Do you even know how to fight? You're kind of little. I mean, your brothers are over there, and they don't think you can do this. Why should I think you should do this? What do you mean? And David says this. Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. All right, let's just pause there for a second. If that's all you heard, if you're King Saul, and this guy wants to go out and fight Shaquille O'Neal out in the middle of nowhere, and everybody else is scared, and this guy looks pretty young and pretty green and small, and he says, yeah, but I'm a shepherd. I keep sheep all the time. Is that going to instill confidence in you? Maybe not so much, but the next line might. Because when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, which lets you know this. David is crazy. He's crazy. Right? Like if a lion or a bear comes up and grabs anything from me, you got it. Yeah, absolutely. You can have that dog. I love that dog, but sorry. Sorry, Fluffy. It is what it is, man. It is what it is. It's because it's a lion. It's a bear, right? I mean, let's just be honest. If you grabbed one of your kids, maybe you're going after it. You're going to do some mental calculation. You're going to go, I don't know, is that my favorite kid or not? You're going to think about it because it's a lion. It's a bear. These are rough, tough animals. They got fangs on them that big. Their claws are even bigger. Like, they could tear you to pieces. But David, I guess because of the principle of the thing, decides he's going to go after his lamb, right? When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. I went after it, I struck it, and I rescued the sheep from its mouth, and then when it turned on me, I killed it. Now here's what I need you to see next. Here's what I think will help you understand David as a 7 and understand 7s in general. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This as in this next thing, just so happens to be an uncircumcised Philistine, will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. This is just the next thing for David. Sure, like he wants to defend God's name. He wants to defend Israel. But this is kind of just the next step for David. And from this point, after you know the rest of the story, after David fights Goliath, like he becomes a household name, people start singing songs about him. King Saul gets jealous and wants him dead. And ultimately, David becomes the king that everybody judges and bases every other king ideal off of. This is the moment. Because he says, I've killed lions and bears. This is just the next thing. No big deal. I know he seems big to you, but not to me. Not to me at all. See, there's examples throughout David's life. If you go read his entire story, there's example after example after example of him needing more. Just needing more. He had 8 wives and a lot of concubines. And those are just the ones that are mentioned in Scripture. And then one day, he looks over and he sees this other lady who's already wife to somebody else. And he's got to have her. Because more is never enough. I need more. I need this. And he goes and he fights battles that he doesn't even have to really fight. Because more is not enough. And that's what happens when we get into unhealthier places in our life, if you're a type 7. Now, luckily, David is a little bit healthier here as a younger man. And he knows exactly why he needs to fight this person. Even though it's part of his nature just to do the next thing, he's allowing himself to be led by God, and he uses it for God's purposes, which is what we should all do with our personalities. Here's how I know. The next thing we hear is this. David saying, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." David is confident because God is with him. God's been with him with the lion, God's been with him with the bear, and God will be with him with Goliath. So even though it's kind of ingrained in a developed personality of David's, where he has to go from this thing to that thing to that thing, because he knows God is with him, he's not just striking out for no reason. He's following the leadership of God in this moment. And that's something I hope that all of us can do. I hope that's something that each and every one of us will do. That as we go through life, I hope you'll always remember this, that God will take care of you. Especially if you're a type 7 person. Remember, if type 7s, you got this message early on that you're on your own. No one's coming to help. You're on your own. Nobody's coming to help. But what if instead you said, no, that's not true. God is with me. God is taking care of me. God has never left me. God will never forsake me. God is with me. Well, maybe then the things you do, the things you don't do are a little different because you understand you aren't alone. You don't have to go from this thing to the next thing, trying to find something to make you feel satisfied, because you can feel satisfied in your relationship with the creator of the universe. I mean, think about that. Just think about how mind-blowing it is that the creator of the universe looks at you and says, I want her. I want him. I think that person right there is incredible. And you know all the stuff about you. And I know all the stuff about me. So it blows my mind that God would ever want a relationship with me. But think how minuscule we are in the grand scheme of everything we look around and see. I mean, there's Goliaths, there's lions, there's bears. They're all bigger than us. There's oceans, there's volcanoes. There's comets, there's Neptune. And in spite of all of that, God looks at us and goes, I want a relationship here, and I want to take care of that person. Man, the gravity of that hits me sometimes. I hope it does you too. That God looks and says, I love you. I want you. Look, you're never alone because God is with you. Now, maybe you're here and you're saying, how can you say God will take care of us? I've had a lot of bad stuff happen in my life. Or I've known people that had a lot of bad stuff happen in their life, and they were innocent. They didn't do anything to deserve that, and God didn't take care of them. That's because bad things happen to good people in this world. It happens to all of us. We live in a world where evil exists, where sin exists, and sometimes our evil and our sin touches other people. Things we aren't even aware of. It ends up touching other people, and theirs touches ours. And so you can do the best you ever did. You could be totally innocent, and bad will still find you. But what I want to say to you is this: God will still take care of you. There's a local pastor here in town. I heard him give his testimony this past Friday, and every year about this time, I get to hear him give his testimony, and every year he kind of tells a similar part of the story. But this year, he said something a little different. He was talking about his wife. His wife had died from breast cancer as a younger woman, a young mother. And I mean, he's like my age. And as he's telling the story, he tells about how 2 days before her death, they were in the bathroom. He was sitting on the edge of the tub, and he's just crying, as I think I would be also, just bawling. I'd be a mess. And she looks at him and says, "Why are you crying?" And he says, "This isn't fair. This is the worst. Like, why isn't God doing anything? I don't even want to know anything about this, as you might." And she looks at him and says, "Stop crying." I mean, well, when the woman is 2 days away from death and she tells you to stop crying, she says, "Stop crying. Either way, I win. Either way." He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "If I live, I get to stay here and I get to continue building this life with you. But if I die, I'm with Jesus. I'm with God forevermore, the God who loves me and treasures me and values me. I'm with God. Either way, I win." Isn't that what we preach? Isn't that what we tell people? Isn't that what we staked our lives on? Friends, God will take care of you. In this life or the next, God will take care of you. He hasn't given up on you. He hasn't deserted you. He isn't running from anything. And you don't have to go from thing to thing to thing to thing to person to person to person to event to event to event to try to find some high that will satisfy you, because it never will. The only thing that will ever fill that void in your heart is the God of the universe. That's it. Because you were created for relationship with God. And there's only one way to have it: saying yes to making Jesus king of your life. As we end our time, I just want to say it this way. If you haven't decided to follow Jesus, I hope you will. And I hope you'll trust that God will take care of you in this life or the next. But if you're 7, let me tell you this, 2 things. I want you to practice restraint and moderation. And I want you to lean into reflection and solitude. Lean into those times. If you think you might know somebody who's a 7, here's what I want you to help them do. Help them be present in the moment. And friends, right now in this moment, I want us all to understand where we're at. Would you bow your heads and pray with me just for a second? With everybody's eyes closed and head bowed, I just want to give you a moment where you can respond. Maybe you're hearing that this God loves you for the first time. And maybe you want to follow that Jesus because you want to know that God is taking care of you. If you want to start following Jesus, or you want to start following Jesus again, starting right now, would you raise your hand real quick and put it back down? Yes, I see that. I see those hands. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Friends, we need to be praying for them. praying for them right now, just inwardly. If you've made that choice to follow Jesus, I want to know about it. I want to know about it this week, and I want to talk with you this week. But all you need to do is just accept that Jesus is King and start following him with everything you got. We'll teach you how to do that. You come to church, you do all this stuff. Start doing that. Maybe you're here and you've been struggling to quit chasing after things. Maybe you've made some other things God in your life. Somehow God took a back seat for a second. And you want to start over. Would you raise your hand real quick and just put it back down? Yes, see that? I see those hands. Yes, yes. We're praying for you too. God, we love you. And we say, have your way. You are King. You're the King, not us. And we know that we can only find our contentment and our satisfaction in you. Fill that hole that we might be the people you created us to be. In Jesus' name, amen.